When we think of serial killers, mass shooters, and the most dangerous criminals, one could easily believe an adult is capable of committing heinous crimes. Even though it's hard to believe, children can also commit such terrible acts.
In the video, you see Rittenhouse running, and a shot rings out.
This was Kyle Rittenhouse a few moments before he was apprehended by the cops. At just 17 years old, he made headlines for all the wrong reasons: possession of a dangerous weapon and first-degree homicide that left 2 people dead and another injured during a night of protests. However, his crime is nothing compared to the others on this list. From a young criminal who opened fire on a table full of students to 2 teenage murderers who took the life of their close friend, here are the most feared kids in prison. Joshua Phillips. On November 3, 1998, in the Lakewood neighborhood of Jacksonville's South Side, 8-year-old Maddie Clifton was reported missing. Among the community trackers was 14-year-old Joshua Phillips, but it was his mother who would make a scary discovery. On November 10th, she noticed a wet spot on the floor of her son's room. Upon investigating, she found Maddie Clifton's lifeless body hidden beneath the bed. So Joshua was arrested hours later at school. According to him, Maddie had come to his house to play baseball, but he accidentally struck her in the eye with the ball. Panic set in. Fearing his father's wrath, Phillips dragged Maddie inside to hide the injury. The situation spiraled out of control as he tried to silence her cries. To cover up the accident, Phillips grabbed a baseball bat and struck her. In a desperate effort to keep his secret, he killed her by slashing her throat and stabbing her repeatedly with a knife. He then hid her body under the bed, spraying air fresheners to cover the smell of death. Eventually, Joshua Phillips was charged as an adult with first-degree murder. At 15, he was sentenced to life without parole. Fortunately for him, the death penalty was off the table due to his age. Kyle Rittenhouse. The streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin were already boiling over with unrest on the night of August 25, 2020, as protests took over the police shooting of Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man left paralyzed by a white officer's bullets. But that night would take a darker turn when Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old armed with an AR-15 style rifle, tried settling the chaos. In a series of dark moments captured on video, Rittenhouse fired his weapon multiple times. His bullets killed Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber and gravely wounded J.H. Grosskreutz. Rittenhouse testified at his trial that he shot all 3 men in self-defense, claiming he feared for his life during each encounter. In November 2021, Rittenhouse was acquitted on all charges, the jury siding with his claim of self-defense. The events that night, however, left 2 men dead, 1 severely wounded, and a community forever scarred by bloodshed. Mackenzie Shirilla. On a summer night in Ohio, a 17-year-old kid deliberately drove her Camry into a brick wall at 160 kilometers an hour, killing her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and his friend, Davian Flanagan. Prosecutors described the act as premeditated murder fueled by Shirilla's toxic relationship with Russo. The violent crash into the side of a Cleveland area commercial building left both men dead at the scene. Shirilla survived, but the court found her guilty of 4 counts of murder, along with charges of felonious assault, aggravated vehicular homicide, and other crimes. At her sentencing, she was handed 2 concurrent life sentences, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Dimitrios Pagurtzis. On May 18, 2018, in a small town of Santa Fe, Texas, became the site of another American horror story. Dimitrios Pagurtzis, a 17-year-old high school student, carried out a devastating mass shooting at Santa Fe High School, leaving 10 people dead, 8 students and 2 teachers, and injuring 13 others. That morning, Pagurtzis entered the high school armed with a Remington 870 shotgun and a .38 caliber revolver, weapons he had taken from his father. So Pagurtzis admitted he planned the attack with the intent to kill as many people as possible. He was arrested at the scene and charged with capital murder and aggravated assault of a public servant. Zachary Davis. On August 10, 2012, the quiet town of Tennessee was disturbed by an unimaginable tragedy. 15-year-old Zachary Davis murdered his mother with a sledgehammer and tried to burn down the house with his older brother still inside.
Did you kill your mother? Yeah.
And why did you kill her?
She wasn't taking care of my family.
When his father, Chris, died of ALS in 2007, 9-year-old Zachary plunged into darkness. At 15, Zachary was an outcast. He had apps on his phone about serial killers and torture devices, and his notebooks were filled with disturbing phrases like, "You can't spell slaughter without laughter." But it wasn't until that fateful night that the true horror revealed itself. That evening, Zachary waited until his mother was asleep, then went to the basement, retrieved the sledgehammer, and entered her room. Then he hit her to death, striking her nearly 20 times. Drenched in her blood, Zachary then moved to the family game room, where he soaked the room in whiskey and gasoline before setting it on fire. His older brother woke to the sound of the fire alarm. When he went to check on his mother, he found her lifeless and covered in blood. Meanwhile, Zachary was found nearly 10 miles away from home. After his arrest, the kid was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of his mother. Jamar Pinkney Jr. The tragic story of Jamar Pinkney Jr. is one of unimaginable betrayal and horror. On November 16, 2009, Jamar Pinkney Jr., a 15-year-old high school freshman from Highland Park, Michigan, was killed by the person he should have been able to trust the most, his father, Jamar Pinkney Sr. It began with a confession. Jamar Jr. admitted to his mother that he had inappropriate contact with his 3-year-old half-sister. Disturbed and unsure of what to do, his mother called Jamar Sr., believing he would handle the situation responsibly. When Jamar Sr. arrived at the house, he began assaulting his son and forcing him outside at gunpoint, dragging him into the yard barefoot and shirtless. Despite the boy's pleas for life, his father shot him in the head at close range, killing him instantly. His father was charged with first-degree murder and ultimately convicted of second-degree murder. Sentenced to 37 to 82 years in prison, he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Eric Houston. On May 1st, 1992, 20-year-old Eric Christopher Houston stormed Lyndhurst High School in Olivehurst, California, armed with a shotgun and a rifle. By the end of his rampage, 4 lives were lost, 3 students and a teacher. Several others were wounded. For 8 long hours, Houston held nearly 90 hostages before finally surrendering. His motive was rooted in a disturbing grudge. He blamed his former teacher, one of his victims, for giving him a failing grade that prevented him from graduating in 1989. He believed this failure led to his unemployment and the breakup with his girlfriend. In court, he also accused the teacher of molesting him. However, he was apprehended after the arrival of the police. Convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and other charges, Houston's trial was moved to Napa County due to the high-profile nature of the case. The jury sentenced him to death by lethal injection. However, his execution was delayed due to appeals and California Governor Gavin Newsom's 2023 moratorium on capital punishment. Houston, now on death row at San Quentin State Prison, continues to fight his sentence. James Fairweather. A 15-year-old kid experienced his descent into violence back in 2014. His first victim, James Atfield, a 33-year-old man with brain injuries who used crutches, was brutally stabbed over 100 times in a park in Colchester, Essex. 2 months later, in March 2014, Fairweather took the life of his second victim, Nahid Al-Mania, a 31-year-old Saudi student at the University of Essex. She was murdered as she walked down a footpath, stabbed mercilessly in another random attack. But justice would soon catch up. In May 2015, a year after his killing spree began, Fairweather was arrested at 16. During his trial, Fairweather admitted to the murders and revealed a disturbing obsession with notorious killers like Ted Bundy and the Yorkshire Ripper. In April 2016, James Fairweather was found guilty of the murders of James Atfield and Nahid Al-Mania and finally sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. Aaron Caffey. On March 1st, 2008, a family in Alba, Texas, was torn apart by a brutal killing spree. 2 men broke into the Caffey home, murdering a mother and 2 young children. The unfortunate events leading to that night began 5 months earlier, when Aaron started dating 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson. When Aaron broke her phone curfew in February 2008, her parents insisted she break up with Wilkinson. But instead of ending things, Aaron became obsessed with a dark idea: killing her parents to be with Wilkinson. She shared these thoughts with friends and soon plotted the murders with Wilkinson and his friend, Charles Wade. On the night of the massacre, Wilkinson and Wade arrived at the Caffey home, while Aaron and Wade's girlfriend waited in the car. Inside the house, Wilkinson shot Terry and Penny while they slept. While Wilkinson's gun jammed, Wade used a sword to nearly decapitate Penny. The killers then went upstairs to where Aaron's brothers were hiding and killed them in cold blood. After looting the house for valuables, they set it on fire, ensuring no one could survive. But Terry crawled from the flames and managed to reach a neighbor's house. Hours later, all 4 suspects were in custody and charged with 3 counts of capital murder. Wilkinson and Wade received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Aaron was sentenced to life but could apply for parole after 40 years. George Stinney Jr. On June 16, 1944, South Carolina executed George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old boy. He remains the youngest person executed in the U.S. during the 20th century. Stinney, a black teenager, was accused of murdering 2 young white girls, 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 8-year-old Mary Emma Thames, with a railroad spike. His trial lasted just 3 hours, with an all-white jury deliberating for only 10 minutes before condemning him to death by electrocution. 6 weeks later, George Stinney faced the electric chair. At just 5'1" and weighing barely 90 pounds, the guards struggled to secure his small frame. When the lethal current surged through him, the oversized mask slipped from his face, exposing the dead kid behind the mask. Craig Price. Craig Price's brutal rampage started on September 1, 1989, when he broke into the home of Joan Heaton, a 39-year-old woman living just a few streets away from him. High on marijuana laced with LSD, Price armed himself with a kitchen knife he found in Joan's home. He first attacked Joan, stabbing her 57 times. Her daughters, Jennifer and Melissa, were asleep in the house. Craig turned his anger on the children, stabbing Jennifer 62 times and Melissa 30 times, crushing Melissa's skull in the process. Blood spatter and the number of stab wounds revealed the killer's rage and lack of remorse. Despite his horrifying crimes, Rhode Island law at the time considered Craig Price a juvenile. He could not be tried as an adult, and the maximum sentence he could receive was incarceration in a juvenile facility until his 21st birthday. Nathaniel Brazil. A 14-year-old boy, Nathaniel Brazil, was sentenced to 28 years in prison for the murder of his favorite teacher. Brazil, who was still 15, walked into Barry Grunrow's classroom at Lake Worth Middle School and shot the 35-year-old teacher between the eyes with a .25 caliber pistol. According to him, Grunrow's crime was refusing to let Brazil speak to 2 girls in the room. Prosecutors who tried Brazil as an adult pushed for a life sentence, arguing that he was beyond redemption. The defense painted a different picture, pleading for leniency and attributing the killing to a tragic accident. Brazil claimed the gun, taken from his grandfather's cookie jar, fired unintentionally. He was eventually sentenced to 28 years in prison, where he will serve his time in a juvenile facility until reaching adulthood, after which he will be transferred to an adult prison. Upon release, he faces 2 years of house arrest and 5 years of probation. Nicholas Lindsay. A quiet 16-year-old kid had a dream of playing professional football. However, he had other plans. Lindsay skipped school often and was accused of stealing a car. And for $140, he purchased a gun off the street, a decision that would eventually destroy lives. On February 21, 2011, St. Petersburg officer David Crawford encountered Lindsay while responding to a call about a suspicious person. Crawford approached the teen, pulling out his notepad to speak with him, but instead of replying, Lindsay fired repeatedly, killing the officer in cold blood. Lindsay was arrested and held without bail. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Officer Crawford. Tyler Hadley. On July 16, 2011, a 17-year-old carried out his horrifying plan. Armed with a claw hammer, he brutally hit his parents, Blake Hadley and Mary Jo Hadley, to death inside their Florida home. The attack was terrifying, leaving the couple's bodies unrecognizable. With their lifeless bodies hidden in a locked bedroom, Tyler cleaned himself up, texted friends, and announced a house party. More than 60 teens packed into the Hadley home, drinking and smoking, unaware or perhaps willfully ignoring the dark truth just behind a closed door. The truth surfaced only after a friend, suspicious of Tyler's erratic behavior and strange confessions, alerted the authorities. 3 years later, Tyler Hadley was convicted of the cold-blooded murders of his parents. He is now serving a life sentence and remains Florida's darkest family tragedy. TJ Lane. On February 27, 2012, the small town of Chardon, Ohio, made headlines due to a high school shooting that left the community in shock. TJ Lane, a 17-year-old student at Lake Academy Alternative School, walked into Chardon High's cafeteria that morning armed with a .22 caliber handgun. Lane wasn't a stranger to Chardon High. He had previously attended the school before transferring to the alternative program. The motive behind the attack was unclear, though some reports suggested he felt victimized. A teacher quickly chased him out of the school, and he was arrested near his car about a mile away. Investigations revealed that Lane had stolen the gun from his uncle. In March 2013, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, but the story didn't end there. On September 11, 2014, Lane, along with 2 other inmates, broke out of the Allen Correctional Institution in Ohio. For hours, he was on the run, until he was captured 6 hours later. In March 2016, after growing security concerns, Lane was transferred to the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, a maximum security prison built for the most dangerous criminals. Luke Woodham. On October 1st, 1997, 16-year-old Luke Woodham unleashed terror at Pearl High School in Pearl, Mississippi. Armed with a hunting knife, he walked into the school and opened fire, killing 2 students and injuring 7 others. Earlier that morning, Woodham had hit his mother, Mary Ann, to death in their home with a baseball bat. Her crime, according to him, was putting him through years of abuse. But investigators found no evidence of abuse, only a son consumed by anger and hate. At the school, Woodham showed no remorse as he roamed the hallways, targeting classmates. His rampage came to an end when the school's assistant principal, Joel Myrick, confronted him with a handgun and detained him until police arrived. At his trial, Woodham was convicted of 3 counts of murder, 2 students and his mother, and 7 counts of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders and an additional 140 years for the assaults. Jordan Brown. On a cold morning in February 2009, in a quiet farmhouse in Pennsylvania, Jordan's father's pregnant fiancée, Kenzie Marie Hook, was found shot to death. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Jordan, claiming the 11-year-old had used his .20-gauge shotgun, a gift from his father, to commit the brutal crime. By the end of the day, Jordan Brown's life as a free child was over. The boy was charged with first-degree murder and homicide of an unborn child, a decision that would haunt him for nearly a decade. He was sent to juvenile detention and convicted by the court despite his unwavering claims of innocence. Jordan remained locked up until 2018, when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his conviction, citing insufficient evidence. But the damage had been done. By the time he walked free, Jordan had spent his years behind bars, stripped of his childhood, and left with scars that would never fully heal. The Scream Killers. Back in September 2006, Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper, 2 students of Pocatello High School, executed a gruesome and calculated murder that would earn them the nickname the Scream Killers. Inspired by the 90s horror film Scream, the 2 teenagers planned and carried out the brutal killings of their classmate, Cassie Jo Stoddard. It all started when Cassie invited Adamczyk, Draper, and her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, to spend the evening. Unknown to Cassie, the boys had crazy intentions. They unlocked the basement door before leaving the house, setting the stage for their return. Later that night, dressed in dark clothing, gloves, and white masks, emulating their favorite slasher film villain, they went back into the home. Once Matt left, Adamczyk and Draper, who were still armed with 2 knives, stabbed her approximately 30 times, 12 of which struck vital organs, including her heart. The attack was merciless, leaving Cassie to bleed to death alone. Her body was discovered 2 days later. In 2007, Adamczyk and Draper were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Both received mandatory life sentences without parole, plus an additional 30 years to life. Barry Lukaitis. February 2nd, 1996, started like any other day at Frontier Junior High School in Moses Lake, Washington. By the afternoon, it became a scene of horror. Barry Lukaitis, a 14-year-old 8th grader, walked into his 5th period algebra class armed with a Winchester .30-30 rifle and 2 handguns. In his pockets, he carried 78 rounds of ammunition. At 2 p.m., as the cold bit outside, Lukaitis entered the school through a back door and made his way to the algebra classroom. Inside, teacher Liana Cares, a 49-year-old mother of 4, was writing an equation on the blackboard. The students barely had time to react as Lukaitis pulled out his rifle and fired. His first target was 14-year-old Manuel Vela Jr., seated in the front row. The bullet struck him, killing him instantly. A second shot killed 14-year-old Arnie Fritz, seated just behind Vela. A third hit 13-year-old Natalie Hintz, tearing through her arm. Then Lukaitis turned the rifle on Cares, shooting her in the back as she fell to the ground, still clutching the chalk and eraser. After being arrested, Lukaitis, who was tried as an adult, was convicted of 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and multiple charges of kidnapping. The court sentenced him to 2 life terms plus 205 years, ensuring he would die in prison.